later. All right. Hello, my name is Tim Coulter, and I'm speaking to...
I'm Rob Sabourin.
And he'll be talking about how to prepare an experience report for a peer conference. So, Rob, I want to... I'm going to throw a couple questions at you, and we'll just kind of jam.
Very good.
The first one, what is an experience report?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent starting point. What is an experience report?
Yeah.
And I give experience reports usually to communities, to groups of people, either at what we call peer conferences, which are groups of maybe 20 to 30 people that get together, or at bigger events like you might say professional conferences.
Yeah.
Experience report is a way that I concisely share my first-person experience in something that I have done which relates to the theme of the conference to help show other people basically what happens in the real world.
Right.
Experience report, what it is sometimes better described by what it is not.
Okay.
So an experience report is not telling you what you should do. It's giving you a chance to listen to what I really did. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right. Now, you mean now when you say that, you mean an experience report shouldn't be just like a PowerPoint presentation saying, do X, do Y, do Z.
Exactly. The way I often say it is an experience report that I give is never prescriptive.
Sure.
I don't tell you what you should do or what someone should do.
Right.
I talk about what I did.
Right.
So I'm not telling you what you should do. Now, of course, you might infer that what I did might be relevant for you, but that's not my point. My point is to share what I really did.
Right. So when you're, I guess, when you're deciding to talk about, or when you're deciding to give an experience report, how do you choose a topic? How do you choose what experience to talk about?
That's an excellent beginning to discuss an experience report. The topic. Well, first of all, I don't really choose the topic. When I'm working at a peer conference or a professional conference, there's almost always a theme. These events have what we call content owners, or we've come to call it content owners, but it's someone who basically is driving the theme of the conference, the theme of the event. For example, at WAPR, the Workshop on Performance and Reliability Testing, we might have a theme called how do we model usage of a system in performance testing. That theme is established, and then we call for papers, we call for presentations, we ask, hey, do you have experience to share on that theme? So, the first step is understand what the theme of the conference is. That's usually stated in the request for proposals of the conference or the request for presentations in a peer conference. The person who's driving that, we call it the content owner. Sometimes conferences call it a program chair. That's a person that you should talk to or correspond to before you dive in and say, hey, I have an experience to share. Now, if the theme, so I'm talking about Rob Sabourin personally, so if the theme resonates with me, and that means that I feel strongly about it, or I have a sort of attachment to it, I will sort of search through my past, think of the projects I've worked on. I have a bias towards experiences of mine that relate to the theme of the conference, but that follow what we call the 3 R's. Real, recent, and relevant. So I seek my experiences that are basically things I really did. So projects I worked on, not projects my friend told me about, not projects I read about in a book, not projects I found on Google, but projects I really worked on. Blood, sweat, tears, real stuff. So I find a project that, of course, related to the theme, but there's something learned related to the theme in that project that I really did. That's the first one. Recent, I really try not to find something from 35 years ago. I try to find something that's sort of close to the present. And that's usually I do that because I want when I do share my experience, I want it to resonate with people who are not necessarily aware of what I'm talking about, but I want them to feel comfortable. I want to anchor in something that's recent.
Yeah.
So I get as recent as I can. So real, recent, and relevant. I want it on topic.
Yeah.
So, and it's not the subject of my experience. Let's say the subject of my experience was, for example, to manage a software development team, and the theme is unit testing tools. Well, my story is going to be something about my job at the time, managing a team, but it's going to have a lesson or a learning, something I learned or experienced about unit testing.
Yeah.
So it's not Rob, the unit testing expert, it's Rob, the software engineering manager, and how unit testing had something to play in our successes or our failures.
Right. So okay. So let's say I've chosen a topic that fits everything that you just mentioned, and I want to give an experience report about it, and it also fits the theme of the conference. Where do I go from there?
Right. So, and assuming you have an experience, and so you found the experience, you found sort of a connection in the experience to the theme, and it's not too contrived. Right? I mean, you can probably connect anything to anything, so it's got to be not too contrived. What I then do is I go and I look for what I call focusing questions. Now, as frankly, not just an experience report person, but also as content owner often, I've learned that when I'm sharing the theme of my conference, I want to give people a list of focusing questions.
Okay.
And these sort of take the theme and sort of say the type of thing we're going to look at. And so I look at focusing questions, like, for example, if the theme is related to unit testing, the focusing questions, what might be, what tools worked, what tools didn't work, was it painful to install it, how did it integrate into your workflow, how did it, the conference chair would have come up with a bunch of focusing questions, never expecting every presentation to meet all or answer all of the focusing questions, but certainly trying to sort of set the stage for you. So I look at the focusing questions, and so now I'll take, maybe the conference chair had like 10 focusing questions.
Yeah.
I dive in, I take maybe the 3 or 4 that are related to my learning.
Yeah.
Then, so you have that list. Then what I do is I go through my notes. So my notes, my recollections, my artifacts, my source codes, my emails, whatever evidence I have of the experience I went through.
Yeah.
I might privately talk in person to some people I was involved with at the time. So to just rekindle my memories of it so it's all fresh. And then what I'll do before, this is in preparation, I'll jot down notes, usually in the style of a mind map.
Yeah.
So I'm a big mind map fan, so I'll create a mind map with tools like FreeMind, open source tools usually to do that. And what I'll be doing is I'll write down the story as I recollect it, that it really happened, point by point, bullet by bullet, and I'll try to identify the points in my story that resonate with the focusing questions.
Yeah.
So you're looking at the two things, right? My story, focusing questions. And those are going to be key elements of my narrative when I give the experience report.
Yeah.
It's that place. Where does the focusing question hit the road, right? Where does the rubber hit the road? Where does the focusing question hit the experience?
Yeah.
Now, when I recollect it in a mind map, I'm recollecting it in a way that might be topically related, and so if I do that, after I write that down, I shuffle the map around to be chronologically correct, and I look for gaps. Gee, there's a wide time between here and here. I wonder what happened there and then.
Yeah.
And so I try to fill in the story.
Okay.
So I writing a mind map and shuffling it around to make sure I've got my my facts and the order of presentation. If I find several places where in the story where I match to the answer of a focusing question or a learning related to focusing question, what I might do then is I might do what you'd call a little baby root cause analysis.
Okay.
So I say, wow, that's interesting. I wonder what events led up to that.
Yeah.
So what led up to that? And when I look at that, I look at 3 types of things, 4 sometimes, but I look for, are there business factors that led up to that? And this is going to be very important when I tell the story, because I want to lay context. Business factors. Are there technical factors that led up to that?
Yeah.
Are there specifics of our organization, our life cycle model, our team model? Were we distributed? Were we remote? Were we together? So how were we using waterfall or agile? These are organizational things. So business, technical, organizational, and On occasion, this is the dominant one, but it's hard for me to sort of describe. It's called cultural factors.
Okay.
Was there something about the way we worked together, or maybe even what country this was in, that would have it? So I've got my mind map, I've shuffled it, I've got the relationship, and then the factors.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that last part about, you know, doing a mini root cause analysis.
Yeah.
What if do you think that's like a very important to have the root cause for giving an experience report, or do you think you can talk about your experience even if you don't know what caused?
I may never talk about this.
Yeah.
The questions I was trying to answer is, how do I prepare
Sure.
for it, right?
Sorry, yeah.
So I don't want, I'm not going to say all this stuff, but I want to understand it a little bit.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when I was living that experience,
yeah.
my goal in living the experience wasn't to tell the story.
Yeah.
My goal in living the experience was to get the job done, usually,
yeah.
at my customer
Sure.
site or on the project team. And that's why I do this mini root cause analysis, just so that I could find what elements of the story are relevant to share.
I see, okay.
So I'm not trying to say I do all this research so that I have this big story to tell. No,
yeah.
I don't. I want to find what elements of my experience are interesting to share.
Got it, okay.
So yeah, I'm going to do a little bit more digging
yeah.
than is needed, but it's mostly because when I experienced it, it wasn't for the purpose of giving the experience report.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, all right, so let's get into delivery a little bit.
Okay.
So, how should you give an experience report when you're standing up there? Is there a certain, you mentioned chronological order?
Yeah, okay, so there's definitely some styles in presentation, and I have learned not to rely on stuff like PowerPoint, as I guess a lot of people know that sort of wisdom, but I do like diagrams. So I might, for example, spend an hour and a half talking with a block diagram on the wall, but not so much as to guide the discussion, but just I like a diagram to help talk about technical things.
Yeah.
I find block diagrams and stuff like that are very useful.
Yeah.
But other than diagrams, I won't have any visual aids.
Yeah.
I might, unless there's, of course, maybe some source code to show people, or graphs
Sure.
in
Yeah.
performance testing might come up. Now, the presentation of the experience report, before I have it, I usually use index cards.
Okay.
So I'll have index cards with my key points, because I can't remember all my key points. I don't memorize the story.
Yeah.
But I do want to have them there, and those key points are the intersection, right, of the focusing questions with my story.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
And so I always start off by basically talking about what the context is. So the business, technical, organizational, the context of the project at the time, and then I talk about what my role was at the time, and so who I was, what my role was at the time, and why I was on that project. So my role in the project. I then talk about why that project was important to my business or the business of my customers. So it's not just the project I'm talking about. I want you to know why that project was of some significance to the business. After that, so I've got the why it was done, what my role was at the time. I want to then talk about what led up to the incident I'm going to be sharing with you.
Yeah.
So what led up to the incident? I walk through that, what led up to it. It was a dark and stormy night. It rained. There was a hole in the roof. I went up there, and suddenly we saw a meteorite shower or something. So what led up to it? So it was the hole in the roof that led us to look there that led to the thing.
Right.
And there's always that of course captivates people, makes it very real, makes it very engaging now, because now you're sort of saying, I wasn't expecting to learn this, but this is what happened on the way to the forum. The funny thing happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get to that point. So we're talking about delivery.
Yeah.
I share that, I get to that point, and then I explain what I did that's of interest. Every time in my story, so now I'm in the little part in the middle of this, that's my story.
Yeah.
Every part I'm going to tell, I'm going to make sure when I get to a focusing question, I emphasize that.
Okay.
Because people don't necessarily notice that. And so I want to say, well, this is what this was, and then pop, that relates to this focusing question. I'll be explicit.
You'll actually say the words, this is the focus.
Explicit. I will be explicit. I'll even use the word focusing question if I have them.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be explicit about that, and I think people like that because they're sort of, you're anchoring the story to them, because some of these stories are very compelling for a lot of other reasons.
Yeah.
And I could talk about it for a lot of reasons, but the reason I'm talking about it is because it responds to the focusing questions. Responds to the focusing questions.
Yeah.
And I tell the story then, because usually it's chronological order, what I did, but not always chronological order. Sometimes it's important to talk about the data layer and then the business layer and then the presentation layer.
Yeah.
And that just makes sense.
Yeah.
So if it's not chronological, I want to make that conspicuous. I want to make people know, well, wait a second, I'm going to tell it to you this order.
Yeah.
You tell people, don't let them discover, don't get them lost. You know, this is a storytelling thing.
Yeah.
I try to make it interesting and engaging, but I don't exaggerate. I try to make it real. I tie it to the events of the day. For example, if something happened in the world around that time, I might remind people.
Yeah, sure.
That was the day before Chernobyl or whatever. So you have, some people can anchor things to history. Similarly with technological things. I might say, well, this was the product that was released before that one. And everyone says, oh yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah.
So what I'm looking at is familiarity. I want you to be familiar with parts of my story.
Yeah,
I
sure.
want it to be part of your life
Yeah.
that I'm talking about, not just part of my life.
Yeah.
And during this presentation, in most of the peer conferences I work at, we facilitate this in a style which is called the lost style
Yeah.
of
I was
facilitation.
going to ask about that. Yeah.
And so when I'm telling the story, I am allowed to tell the story without interruption of a lot of questions about the story. However, I have learned a wonderful thing in sharing these stories. Beautiful thing. I never realized how beautiful it was I assume that my audience is sharp, intelligent, and wise.
Yeah.
And that if I use a word that they're not familiar with, that they will stop me and ask me a clarifying question.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to go and give a story and every time a term comes up, spend an hour defining it.
Yeah.
That, by the way, leads to, in my experience, very dry experience reports that people get sort of distracted. But that's what academics seem to do all the time. When I go to academic presentations, they go, define this, define this, define this, and then use the words.
Right.
Instead, I will use a vocabulary consistent with an experienced professional in the field that we're talking about.
Yep.
Based on my experience, I'm not saying we have uniform vocabulary, but based on my experience, I expect and encourage, and the facilitator demands that people ask clarifying questions. Clarifying questions do not challenge the content.
Yes.
They-
Yeah, sure.
They clarify meaning.
Yeah.
And I don't define it first, but when you ask me, I will be delighted to share
Yeah.
the definition of terms, industry terms and acronyms, things that are words that you might not be familiar with, you have a different word for. So that's what we'll do during that, what we call open season.
Sure. Yeah.
After that's done, then we go into the questioning part of it. But you asked me about telling the story, so I think that's sort of what I try to do.
Yeah. Do you have any? Do you have your own personal style that you like? A certain way that you like to give experience reports? I guess aside from what you're saying now, is there anything you like to do to spice it up or keep people engaged?
Well, I do spend a lot of time making sure that I've got a really good story that's on topic.
Yeah.
And I find that rather than saying something special about mine, I want to comment about other people's,
Sure.
which is
Yeah,
not
please.
something I like to do. But I've been to so many of these reports, and I find that people get away from the storytelling part and
Yeah.
the personal part.
Yeah.
And I really want it to be, personal and something, the story of what I did, not the story of
Everything.
how
you went
everything
through.
works
Yeah.
around me.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that answers the question.
No, I think it's
But,
perfect. Yeah.
but it's not, for me, that's how I do experience reports. I don't know if I want to brand it as a Rob Sapp style, because
Sure.
I've learned this from other people and the great storytellers who and the great writers have shared the great things I've read, the great lessons I've learned were always from learning from people's first-person experience. Once you hear the first-person experience, you can compare it to your first-person experience and do something that I like to call an affinity analysis. And in an affinity analysis, what I like to do is saying, well, you did this and you did this. What's the same and what's different, and what can we learn from that? And a lot of the great things I've learned about software engineering, especially software testing,
Yeah.
came from doing that.
Yeah.
And very often at a peer conference after hearing the experience reports.
Yeah. I think that that is the end of my questions.
There's a couple of things that people ask about
Yeah.
with experience reports that they're uncomfortable with that I might want to share with
Oh,
you.
please,
What
absolutely.
People ask about.
Yeah, sure.
Once in a while, people ask me how long should an experience
Oh,
report be.
of course.
And
Yeah.
this is T-shirt sizing at its best.
Yeah.
If you can learn how to do an experience report in 5 minutes or less,
Yeah.
i.e. like an elevator talk. These are awesome things. We in the industry tend to call these lightning talks these days. And it's a mini experience report that takes 5 minutes. And I tell you, those are tough to prepare, but they're awesome because you really pack a punch.
Yeah.
So those are usually very microscopically focused. That's lightning talks, 5-minute one. A typical one that we do at a peer conference, like a Lost style peer conference, to give the talk is rarely more than between a half an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
To give the talk in open season.
Yeah.
Rarely more than that.
Yeah.
But the questioning, of course, that comes afterwards, with a good, relevant, on-topic experience report could last a whole day if you want. The whole community gets involved, and it's great fun.
Yeah.
But the actual storytelling part, I would suggest for that style of conferences between a half hour and 45 minutes. Those conferences also last about 2 or 3 days, and they're not time boxed. So
Yeah.
we let people talk as long as there's energy around the topic.
Right.
At the Conference for the Association for Software Testing, CAST, we've been using for a few years now this style that's very similar to Lost style, but there is a little more time boxing, and they have, I believe it's like 90 minutes, half of it for the talk, half of it for questions, and if there's still energy in the room, they continue later on. I don't think people should worry about having to talk for more than about that much time, because I think the point of this experience sharing is to not just tell stories to people and leave, but to use the story to trigger a beautiful dialogue where people can draw learnings from it. And you'll find that with a small group of people, between 20 and 30 people, as I was saying, you're going to get a very interesting conversation afterwards.
Yeah.
I've also learned, though, that it's very important to facilitate that conversation so that not just that everybody fairly has a chance to speak, but also that you don't get too distracted from the theme of the conference.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's about it then.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rob.
Well, thank you, Tim.
And it was great talking with you.
All right, good talking to you. Thanks for hanging out, and have a good day.
I will.